Is motherhood a trigger for emotional overeating? And the short answer is yes. Because when people ask this question, what they're looking for is usually permission to acknowledge that motherhood is hard, that it is harder than they thought it would be, and they're struggling in ways that perhaps they didn't expect. Hello and welcome back to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and before we jump in, I just want to remind you to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review if this podcast has enhanced your life in any way so that we can get these conversations out there to more people. We can help them too. Thank you so much for that. And today I want to talk about something that I hear a lot about in my work. We're going to talk about motherhood and emotional eating. And I just want to start by saying that I myself am not a mother to human children. However, I have been a coach and a guide and have worked with so many women who are mothers. So this episode is inspired by them. It is for them. And it comes from a lot of knowledge and lived experience, adjacent lived experience that I have been fortunate enough to, be trusted with some of these feelings and some of these perspectives. I decided it was time to bring this conversation to the forefront. And I really hope that if you are a mother to human children or just, your life is about caretaking, you'll find resonance with this episode, because I really do feel like this is something that, a lot of women struggle with, sometimes secretly and sometimes in isolation. So the core question of this episode is motherhood a trigger for emotional overeating? And the short answer is yes, it can be, absolutely. But again, I don't know if people understand why, and I want to go into that today, because when people ask this question, what they're looking for is usually permission to acknowledge that motherhood is hard, that it is harder than they thought it would be, and they're struggling in ways that perhaps they didn't expect, right? And they're wondering if food has become the thing that they turn to when they feel like they're at their wit's end, right? When they can't handle it anymore. And I want to say that it is normal. It is. And not in the sense that it's healthy or sustainable long term, but in the sense that it makes complete sense given what motherhood actually demands of you, because there's this massive gap between what we're told that motherhood is supposed to be and what it actually is. And we're told that motherhood is supposed to be fulfilling. It's the most meaningful thing that you'll ever do. And it absolutely, for the women that in my life that I know are mothers, it absolutely is those things. And from what I hear from like I said, my many friends, my many clients, this is what I hear. Like I said, I myself made a choice not to have children, and maybe I'll record an episode about that at a later date. But for now, I want to acknowledge that I know that motherhood is also, it's relentless, right? And it can be isolating, and it is completely destabilizing to your sense of self. And not many people really talk about that part of it, right? So you become a mother and suddenly you're overwhelmed in ways that you perhaps didn't anticipate. And maybe you feel selfish for wanting anything for yourself because you're supposed to be selfless. Maybe you feel like you're failing because you can't do it all and you can't do it perfectly. You don't feel like you can admit that you're struggling without feeling like you're a bad mom. And in the middle of that, what happens is with all of these feelings and judgments, food becomes the one thing that's just for you. It becomes the one moment of pleasure in a day sometimes that's otherwise completely consumed by other people's needs. And I hear this all the time, and I don't think this is a coincidence, right? I hear these words verbatim. And I think emotional overeating in motherhood is a response to something very specific. And today I want to talk about what that something is. Because once you understand what's actually happening, I really do believe, and I've seen this over and over again with the women I work with, it stops feeling like a personal failing. And it starts feeling like information about what you actually need and how you can actually create a new dynamic with food that allows for more grace. Before we get into it, I want to introduce myself again. If you're new to me, my name is Alana Kessler. I'm a registered functional dietitian. I have been in this health and wellness and mindfulness space for 20 plus years as an expert and 30 years at this point as someone who healed myself, right? So I do think sometimes in this intro, I forget to remind myself and even the audience that I struggled with emotional overeating for 15 years, weight fluctuations and all that. So, there was a time where I was struggling, and then there was a time where I was my own client. And then I became somebody who in the last decade or so has really found my passion in helping people find love with their body, lose weight, reconnect with themselves, overcome any kind of emotional or addictive behaviors with food, and really just live your best life. And I use my clinical experience, my functional experience, my personal experience to do that. So if you are new here, welcome. If you have been a longer time listener, welcome back. And let's dive in. Let's get into it today. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the identity loss that comes with motherhood, because I think this is the thing that nobody really prepares you for, right? They tell you that your life is going to change. You know that you're going to be tired. You know that it's going to be hard, but I don't think many people really get the gravity of the fact that you're going to lose yourself. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but almost like in 1,000 small ways that add up to you looking in the mirror one day and not recognizing the person looking back. Because before you became a mother, and even still now, right? Even now, but before you became a mother, when it was just you, you were quote unquote a person, right? You had interests, you have goals, you have a sense of who you are and what mattered to you. You had time to think, you had time to pursue things, time to just be. And then you became a mother, and that identity consumes everything else, right? And this is what I hear all the time. Your time isn't yours, your body isn't yours, your thoughts aren't even yours, because you're constantly thinking about someone else, what they need, what they're doing, if they're okay, if you yourself are doing it right. And all the things that used to make you feel like you, maybe the work you cared about, the hobbies you enjoyed, the friendships you maintained, the rituals you had, the version of yourself that existed outside of being someone else's caretaker, that gets pushed to the side. And it's not because you don't care about it anymore, right? You absolutely do. Right? Maybe it's even something you really do think about, but there's no space to implement it, to act on it. And I think this is one of the most disorienting parts of motherhood, because it's really confusing. There's like a dissonance, because like you're supposed to be happy, you're supposed to feel fulfilled. This is what you wanted, this is what you chose. So why do you feel so lost, right? Why do you feel like you've maybe disappeared? And I think the answer is, and I think this is something that once you acknowledge it, I do think really does help. It's because you sort of have disappeared, right? Not completely, not permanently, but the version of yourself that existed before motherhood, the one who had autonomy and time and a clear sense of self, that version is gone. And what we're told is that you're supposed to just be okay with that, right? You're supposed to just accept this. And this is what motherhood is. It's supposed to be seamless, right? The sacrifice is part of the deal. And it should be like something that you just accept, right? That your needs come last now. And maybe in theory, you're okay with that. In theory, you're okay with that because there is so much fulfillment being a mom. But in practice, and in certain parts of your nervous system, it can feel like drowning and food becomes the raft. Because eating and having that sensational experience of food is one of the few things that you can do that's just for you, right? I've actually had clients tell me that their emotional overeating at night is exactly this for them. That's exactly what this is. They put the kids to bed and it's like for them, right? It's not like you could take a long bath. Maybe in the beginning you can't go for like an hour-long run because maybe you don't have childcare. And when we talk about pursuing other interests or hobbies, it's not that you don't want to, but it's possible that you don't have the time or the energy, right? But you can eat. Doesn't take up a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of energy. You can stand in the kitchen after everyone has gone to sleep and eat something that you can say is just for you, something you don't have to share, something you don't have to justify, right? That's why a lot of times it's done in private, something that for just a few minutes makes you feel like a person again that has sensation, not just a caretaker or not just the identity of being a mother. And I don't think that's about the food, right? A lot of times people hyper focus on the food, right? Because once they realize they're eating too much of it or weight gain starts to happen, it's like, oh, this is the food thing. But it's not about the food. It's about trying to reclaim some small piece of yourself in a life that feels like it's entirely about someone else. And the second thing I want to talk about is the guilt, because I think that guilt, right? So much of what I've observed is that guilt can be a baseline emotional state of motherhood. And it comes from two completely contradictory directions. Number one is you feel guilty for not being enough, for not being patient enough, for not being present enough, for not enjoying your kids enough, or enjoying the moment enough, right? Maybe you feel guilty for losing your temper, for checking out, for wanting a break, for not doing all the things that you think a good mom is supposed to do, right? Which is like the homemade meals, right? Cooking all the time, the enriching activities, the perfectly organized home, right? The calm, regulated responses to every tantrum and meltdown from your children. You see other mothers who seem to have it all together and you're comparing yourself, right? Who seem to genuinely love every second. And you think to yourself, what is wrong with me? And the guilt sits there and it's constant and it's heavy, and that's real, right? You have this guilt coming from this place, and then you feel guilty for wanting anything for yourself, right? For wanting alone time, for wanting to go back to work, right? For wanting to do something that's not related to your kids, for wanting your body back, for wanting your life back, for wanting to feel like yourself again, because wanting anything for yourself feels selfish, right? Somewhere deep down, you feel like wanting something for yourself means you're not grateful enough for what you have. And so you suppress those wants, right? You try to strong arm yourself to be grateful, to focus on the good, right? It's like this bypass. And all of that might be true, right? You can do those things. You can feel those things, but it doesn't change the fact that you still feel the loss. You still feel this undercurrent of resentment. You still feel exhaustion, and you still feel guilty for feeling it. And this is where the food comes in, right? Because the food and the eating is the thing you can want without feeling guilty about it. You can do the food thing in tandem with everything else, right? You can't say I need a break from my kids, but you can say like I need chocolate. You can't say I need to do something just for me. This is how, I'm not saying you can, I'm saying this is what your subconscious is thinking. You can't say I need to do something for me, but you can eat something just for you. And it doesn't feel selfish the same way that other things do, right? It feels permissible. So food becomes the acceptable outlet for all the wanting that you're not allowing yourself to express in any other way. And so you eat, and it has nothing to do with being physically hungry. A lot of times in my work with women, I'll hear them be like, but I was so hungry. But think about this. You're not actually physically hungry. You're trying to satisfy a want that has nothing to do with food, right? You want to be seen as a person, not just as a mother. You want to have something that's for you, that's yours. You want to feel something other than obligation or exhaustion. And the thing is, food cannot actually satisfy that deeper want, but it's the only thing you are allowing yourself to reach for, because it does sort of give you that momentary relief, that momentary feeling of completion and satisfaction. So you keep doing it. And the third thing I want to talk about is the overwhelm, because I think people underestimate how overwhelming motherhood actually is. And not just in the early days when you have a newborn and you're not sleeping, but ongoing for years. There's no break in being a mother. There's no off switch. Even when you're not physically with your kids, you're mentally with them, you're psychically with them, right? You're still the one tracking the appointments and the school events. And I'm speaking about kids when they're in the formidable ages where they're still living in your house, right? So you're still the one managing all this stuff. You're still the one managing what they want to eat, their grocery list, their meal plan, who needs new shoes, who needs new clothes. When was the last time that, they took a shower or had a vegetable? You're still the one that's holding it all in your head. And this is the part that doesn't often get brought into the foreground, that motherhood isn't just about taking care of your kids. It's about managing the entire ecosystem of needs, of schedules, and logistics. And you're supposed to do that while also potentially holding down a job, working, or managing the house, right? Maintaining your friendships and relationships, and also taking care of your own basic needs. This is why I always say that motherhood is such a masculine energy role, right? We think that being a mom, it's like the most feminine thing, but really the act of being a mother is really masculine. And it's a provider, it's a protector, it's a manager, it's doing energy. And I have a whole episode on masculine and feminine energy that I recorded maybe it was like a year and a half ago. We'll link that in the show notes here if you want to hear more nuance about masculine and feminine energy. And maybe it's something we can do a Q&A on in the future. If you have questions about it, definitely leave us a comment if that's something that you're interested in. But this is something that people don't really address when it comes to energy and masculine and feminine energy. And when we talk about nurturing ourselves, creating the conditions for ourselves to feel abundant and satisfied, it's really important that we start to nurture the feminine energy, right? Because motherhood is very masculine and it's a lot. And from an objective point of view, it can seem like it's too much for one person. But the way our society is like you're just supposed to handle it. And you're supposed to do it all without complaining about it, right? Without struggling, without needing help. Because, that's what good mothers do, right? That's the moms you see in your playgroups and on Instagram, right? Quote unquote. I'm being sarcastic, but that's what we think. That's what our subconscious is thinking. And so you just try to handle it in silence often, right? You push through the exhaustion. You ignore your own needs. You keep going even though you're running on empty. And also your nervous system is in a constant state of activation, because there's something that always needs to be done, right? So you're always, your cortisol levels are totally out of whack, always worried about managing something or trying to keep something from falling apart, right? And that chronic sense of activation, fight or flight, it's a constant state of stress that does something to your brain. It puts you into that survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, your brain looks for relief, right? Any relief. And food provides that. Right? Food is like such an easy, available source. And it doesn't require any planning. It doesn't require childcare, anyone's permission, right? You can just eat. And for a few minutes, your nervous system calms down, right? And not because the overwhelm is gone, but because eating activates the parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digest, right? It signals to your body, we're safe, we're taking care of ourselves, we're okay, even if you're not actually okay, even if the overwhelm is still there, right? But for those few minutes, because of the physiology of our taste buds and our hormones and our vagus nerve, right? Because of our physiology, your body gets a break from the constant state of activation. And that is one of the reasons why emotional overeating becomes so automatic in motherhood, because your nervous system is so desperate for relief. And food is probably the most accessible source. You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone. But there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this: the problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today. And then I want to talk about something that might be a bit taboo, but I want to talk about it because I've heard it from multiple women. And I think it's important that we just air it out a little. And that's the resentment. Because I think a lot of mothers feel resentment and they're terrified to admit it. Because you're not supposed to resent your kids. You're not supposed to resent motherhood. Right? You chose this, you wanted this, so how can you resent it? But here's the thing: you can love your kids and still resent what motherhood has taken from you. You can be grateful for your family and still resent the fact that your entire life revolves around their needs. You can want to be a mother and still resent the fact that you've lost yourself in the process. These things can coexist. And I think that the resentment comes from the fact that motherhood, as we've constructed it on some level for many people, right? And I think that if you have a ton of financial resources and you're resourced in ways that not everybody is, maybe this isn't true for you, but I think that for most people, the resentment comes from the fact that motherhood, as we've constructed it, requires you to disappear. It requires you to put yourself last. It requires you to sacrifice your time, your body, your identity, your ambitions, your needs, and you're supposed to do it with a smile. You're supposed to be grateful for the opportunity. But the truth is, it's not a fair thing. And it's not fair that mothers are expected to do the majority of the child's care and the household management and the emotional labor, right? It's not fair that many moms are expected to work full-time jobs and also be fully present parents, right? Dads and men do not have that same expectation. It's just not the way it is for men. Right? And it's not fair also. That's an expectation, but mothers are judged also for working and not being home enough. And they're judged for not working and being home too much and staying home. It's also not fair that mothers, women are expected to maintain their pre-baby bodies and their pre-baby productivity and their pre-baby identities while also completely transforming into someone new, like without a runway. And resentment, honestly, is a natural response to that unfairness, but you can't say it out loud. I'm saying it out loud. But a lot of women don't feel like they could say it out loud, but they've said it to me out loud. That's why I feel like I could say this, because I've heard this from multiple women over my 20 years of working with women. And the reason why a lot of women don't want to say it out loud unless they're in private talking to someone like me is because it makes them feel somewhere deep down that if they say it, they're a bad mom, that they're ungrateful, they're selfish, that they're not cut out for this. So you swallow that. You push it down. You tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way. And the resentment just sits there underneath everything. And food becomes a way to manage that resentment because you feel like you can't express it. You feel like you can't say, I'm so angry that I've lost myself. You can't say, I have resentment that nobody sees how hard this is. You feel like you can't say, I'm furious. I'm expected to do all of this without any support. Right? But you can eat, right? You can eat your feelings. You can eat the anger and the resentment and the frustration. And I know that this is true, that it lessens for a little while. That's why we keep doing it. right? If it didn't give any positive feedback that we could recall to try to capture again, this wouldn't be an issue. What people don't understand about emotional overeating in motherhood is that it's not just about stress and overwhelm, right? It's not just about that part of it. Sometimes it's about all the feelings that you feel subconsciously that you're not allowed to have, all the things you're not allowed to say, right? All the needs you're not allowing yourself, or you feel like you're not allowed to express, and food becomes that container for a lot of it, for most of it. And there's another thing that I think is important to bring up, and that's the loneliness, because I think that motherhood can be one of the most lonely experiences there is, right? Which can sound ridiculous because you're never actually alone, right? You're constantly surrounded by people, whether it's the littles who need you or whether it's, the mom group. But that's also exactly the problem, right? You're surrounded by people who need you or who are doing the same thing as you, but they don't necessarily see you, right? Not people who ask you how you're doing and actually wait for the answer. Not necessarily people who care about what you're thinking or feeling or going through, because a lot of the people that you're around are very self-involved, right? And they just need things from you a lot of times. You're in a state of overgiving a lot. And at the end of the day, you feel completely spent because you haven't been receiving. No one has been giving back to you. Maybe you're not sure even how to receive. And that's something that I talk about a lot with the learning how to be in your feminine, is learning how to receive. But I think that this can be especially true if you are at home with young kids. I work with a lot of women who are with young kids, whether it's a baby or whether it's, kids that are tweens or something like that I consider young, teens, things like that, right? Because your entire day, and this is especially true if you have kids that are super young, like babies up to 3-4 years old, your entire day is spent with people who can't have a real conversation with you, right? Who can't really give you your adult needs, in the sense that they can't understand what you're going through. They can't offer you any kind of camaraderie, empathy, support, or connection, right? They're just there, right? Needing you. And I think when you have kids that are teenagers, obviously they're not there to hold space for your emotions. That's not what we're talking about. But you can have conversations with them. They can be funny, and you can receive fun things from older kids. But I think very young kids, I think that this is a really hard time, right? You can see it more in this stage. And then by the time your partner gets home, if you have a partner, right? And not everybody has a partner, but if you do, you can feel so depleted that, again, you don't even have the energy to reach out or receive connection from people around you, right? What you want is to be left alone, right? You want your alone time. But being alone doesn't fix the loneliness, right? It kind of just gives you space, but it doesn't fix the loneliness, because the loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about not being seen, right? It's about feeling like you're going through this massive, transformative, difficult experience, and nobody really understands what it's like. And food becomes a companion for that loneliness, right? It's something that's there for you, something that doesn't ask anything of you, something that provides comfort without requiring you to explain yourself or to be in a good mood, right? Or be anything other than what you are in that moment. And that's why so many women eat in isolation, eat when everyone's gone, because that's when loneliness is the loudest. It's when you finally have a moment to yourself, because that's what you want. You want a moment to yourself, but then you realize how isolated you feel, and food fills that space, right? Because you have to learn to create solitude from alone time. If you don't learn how to create a sense of solitude from being alone, you'll feel isolated, and food will fill that space. So now let's talk about why all of this matters, right? Let's go back to our initial question: can motherhood trigger emotional overeating? And what they're really asking, is it okay that I'm struggling? Is it normal that it's this hard? Am I the only one who feels this way? And I'm going to take today to tell you that, based on my years of evidence and case studies, no, you are not the only one. This is what motherhood does. It totally destabilizes your identity. It fills you with guilt. It overwhelms your nervous system. It creates resentment that you're not allowed to express. It isolates you, even if you're surrounded surrounded by so many people, all of that creates the perfect conditions for emotional overeating. And it's not because you are weak or you're defective in any way or you aren't disciplined, but it's because food is one of the most accessible, available, permissible tools you have, socially kind of acceptable with minimal exposure, right, for managing all of these feelings. And once you understand that, you see that emotional overeating isn't the problem. It's a symptom of the problem, right? And once you see that it's a symptom of the problem, everything shifts. Because then you could stop blaming yourself for eating and you can start looking at what's actually happening underneath, which is the identity loss, the guilt, the overwhelm, the resentment, and the loneliness. And so you could start asking yourself, what do I actually need? And I want to add one more thing, okay? Because I have seen this as well, and I just want these women to feel seen here. I'm not going to say this is the majority, it's not, but there's a subset of women that I work with who are carrying something that is very heavy. And these are the women who had kids, but who didn't actually want them, or they weren't sure, or they felt pressured into it, or who thought they wanted them and then realized that they didn't. And I think this is one of the most taboo things you can say as a mother, is that you didn't want this and that you regret it. And that if you could go back, you might choose differently, because we live in a society that tells women that motherhood is their purpose. It's the most fulfilling thing they'll ever do. And especially if you grew up in communities where this was the ethos, right? That you'll regret it if you don't have kids in the future, or if you don't have kids at all. But nobody, or not many people, really talk about the women who regret having them. And those women exist. I know them. I know you're listening to this. It's fully okay. You know, you never have to really say it to anyone else, but I want you to feel seen here, because a lot of them are suffering in silence because they can't say it out loud. They can't admit that they are drowning in a life that they didn't actually want. That they love their kids, because I'm not saying that you don't love your kids, that they love their kids, but they hate their life. They're doing everything they're supposed to do, but they feel trapped. The guilt for those women who have these thoughts, right, these kind of dissonant types of conflicting thoughts, is unbearable for them, right? Because they think, I chose this, I did this, I brought these children into the world, I have absolutely no right to feel this way. And the resentment there gets even deeper, because it's not just resentment at the unfairness of motherhood that we talked about before, right? The expectations and the fairness of that. It's resentment at themselves for making a choice that they cannot undo. And I think those women, food becomes even more critical for them, because it's the only outlet for feelings that are completely unspeakable. You can't tell anyone that you regret having kids. You can't tell anyone you wish you could go back. You can't tell anyone maybe that you feel like you've ruined your life. So you eat the regret, you eat the resentment, you eat the grief for the life that you're not getting to live now. And no one sees it, right? No one understands it. You just look like a mom who eats too much, right? Who hasn't lost the baby weight, who emotionally overeats like they do, right? It's just, this is what's happening. But what you actually are feeling is a woman who's trying to survive a life that doesn't feel like it fits. And I want to acknowledge you if you are listening to this and you are one of those women. If you're not, I hope this episode was also helpful for you as well. But I do want to acknowledge this woman, okay? Because I believe you deserve not to feel judged, right? You deserve not to just be like, well, feel grateful. Think about all the women who can't have children. Like, that's true, but that has nothing to do with you. You deserve to feel seen, because what you're carrying is real and it's heavy. And I know that you're doing the best you can in an impossible situation. Okay, so before we wrap, here's what I want you to understand. If motherhood has triggered emotional overeating for you, that makes complete sense, right? It is not a character flaw, personal failing at all. It is a logical, neurobiological response to an overwhelming, identity destabilizing, sometimes guilt-inducing and isolating experience that you're supposed to just handle with grace. Right? And the emotional overeating is your nervous system's way of trying to manage something that objectively, think about what we've talked about today, objectively is like so hard to manage. But I want you to think about this, and I want you to remember this, that food can't actually solve the problem. Food and eating is not going to solve the problem. It will provide temporary relief, but it cannot give you back your identity. It cannot eliminate the guilt. It will not regulate your nervous system long term. It will not resolve resentment. moment, and it absolutely cannot fill the loneliness and isolation. And it definitely cannot change the fact that your life right now feels like it doesn't have a lot of space for you. So the solution isn't to stop emotional overeating with a Band-Aid solution like a diet or honestly even a GLP-1, right? I mean, that is kind of a Band-Aid. It just sort of shuts off things. The solution is to address what's creating the need to emotionally overeat, right? Address that and build new skills to resource yourself in other ways so you don't need it as much. And that's different for everyone, right? For some women, it's rebuilding their identity outside of motherhood, right? Finding pieces of themselves that still exist, creating space for those pieces. Right? And that takes support sometimes because that can trigger some things as you're pursuing that, as you're being courageous to do that for yourself, right? For some women, it's about addressing the guilt, learning that wanting things for yourself doesn't make you a bad mother, that taking an hour for yoga or meditation or a walk or a jog or therapy or something, it doesn't make you weak. For some women, it's about regulating their nervous system, getting out of chronic survival mode, finding ways to rest instead of just pushing through. And for some women, it's about expressing the resentment, finding safe places to say the unsayable. And this is so big. This is huge. Right. And this is probably one of the most fulfilling things about my work with women is that I'm that place for them. For some women, it's about connection, finding other mothers who get it, right? The right community for them, women who see them as people, not just as mothers or not just as people that they are trying to perform and appear perfect around, right? Who can hold space and be honest about the complexity of loving your kids and hating parts of motherhood. And for the women who maybe are finding themselves in a situation where they didn't actually want to be mothers, they didn't want this life, it's about finding a way to exist within it without losing yourself completely, without punishing yourself, right? It's about creating pockets of autonomy in a situation that can sometimes feel like a trap, right? It's about processing the grief for the life that they didn't get to live. And it's about finding ways to be honest about their experience without shame. And for some women, it's about all of these things, right? For some women, it's about all of these things because motherhood isn't one thing, right? It's a constellation of things, right? Motherhood doesn't trigger one feeling. It's a constellation of feelings, a contradiction of feelings. And emotional overeating is what happens when you're trying to manage all of this with the only tool you have, which is food. All right. So that is all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them in our YouTube video. If you watch our podcast on YouTube, you can always drop us a comment there. You can also leave a comment on Spotify. And if you're looking for more from me, you can go to the website, www.bewellbyak.com. I have a newsletter that I send out on Sundays. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.